Welcome back to the Infinite Jungle. On today's episode, I have with me Ethereum Foundation researcher, Piper Merriam. Hi, Piper.
Hi, Christine. Nice to see you today.
Nice to see you. I am excited to chat with you about history expiry. Many of my listeners will have been prepped at least on the very basics, non-technical aspects of history expiry, but I'm excited for you to enlighten us and share more about why it's important and what it actually does. Before we get started with our conversation, for our listeners, here is a quick show disclaimer. I need to remind you to please refer to the disclaimer linked in the podcast show notes and note that none of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice, an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by Galaxy Digital or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Piper, this is your first time on the Infinite Jungle Show. I'd love to get started with a bit of an intro of who you are, what you do. Tell me a little bit about what you do at the Ethereum Foundation.
Certainly. I've been around the ecosystem for a long time. I think that I didn't get started as early as you could have, but as early as most people could have. I think I started working on Ethereum things the day that the chain launched.
So 2015? Like Genesis? Oh, wow.
I was the CTO of the company that I worked for, and I had just had a walk where we talked about how we hadn't either talked about the job that he wanted me to do, and that they didn't need a senior engineer, they needed a junior engineer who would do what they told them to do, and that it wasn't going to be a good fit. And they honored the last month and a half of my contract while I searched for the next thing that I was going to do, and Ethereum launched that day. And I had been reading Vitalik's blog posts, and I decided to dive into a blank ecosystem, and that was the beginning.
That's perfect timing. When a door closes, another one opens.
Indeed. It was really opportune timing to be able to both the position I was in my career and just timing with the job that I kind of dove in with, I don't know, completely into a big blank ecosystem and started writing the tooling that I needed to play with it.
And your career, so to speak, I mean, you're a developer, correct?
Mm-hmm.
As in your skill set is coding?
Yes. Historically, at the time, I did a lot of Python and kind of back-end application engineering. And then that lended itself well to, I started into smart contract development like so many do, and dug my way deeper and deeper into the tech stack, building out a whole ecosystem of the Python tools that exist. A lot of those I was one of the original authors on, and I don't know, at the time there was no tooling that did anything, and so if you wanted to do it, you sort of had to make it yourself, and I would package those things up and ship them off as Python libraries for other people to use. It was fun.
And then how did things evolve? I mean, what were you mainly working on? You said you started off with smart contracts, and then over the years, tell me a little bit about how you ended up working on history expiry as your kind of day-to-day, if that is your day-to-day.
It is, so it's sort of. The Python tooling led me deeper into the Ethereum stack, and then at some point I decided that I wanted to write an EVM, so an implementation of the EVM in Python. I was really into testing and how do you write great software at the time. It was like in some portion of my career where the idea that we could write perfect software was still attainable.
Are you too jaded now?
Terribly
no,
so.
That's not possible.
Yeah. I wrote this library called PyEVM, which was a highly legible. At the time, there was the yellow paper, which is really difficult to read and really difficult to parse. PyEVM was this Python implementation of the EVM that was supposed to be highly legible, easy to read. And at the time, client diversity is this is 2016 now or 2017. Client diversity is terrible.
It's just Geth.
Yeah, it is Geth who owns 82% of the network, and Parity at 15% of the network, and they're pulling out of the ecosystem. And like, I think Nethermind exists with like half of a percentage this time. This is like, they had just shown up maybe. And so I'd written that EVM, and I decided that I was going to write a lightweight Ethereum client in Python. Um, Described this as being at the pinnacle of my career and believing I can do anything and being totally wrong. Um, and so we went down this road of writing an Ethereum client in Python called Trinity. You can go find the repository on the Ethereum GitHub. It's long deprecated since about 4 years ago. We spent 4 years on the project and eventually shuttered it. It wasn't possible to do what we wanted to do. You couldn't write a lightweight Ethereum client, at least not in the way that we tried to. And that was the predecessor to the Portal network, because in trying to do it, we learned all of the ways in which the network will not allow you to write a lightweight client, how the network itself imposes demands on its participants such that you cannot be lightweight. We'll talk about this a little bit in History Expiry too. And this is where Portal Network comes from, is trying to fix those fundamental problems. Or fundamental requirements that the existing peer-to-peer infrastructure puts on clients.
Gotcha. So I didn't realize this, but so your experience in trying to build the Trinity client set you up for working on Portal and working on History Expiry today. Is that right?
Absolutely. It was in failing to create a lightweight Ethereum client using the existing stack
Hmm.
and the existing peer-to-peer infrastructure that I like learned enough about how it all fit together to kind of zoom back to first principle kind of things and say, okay, if you really can't solve this using the dev P2P peer-to-peer network and existing execution client infrastructure, then like, what does it take to actually solve this? Like, what if we zoom out a little bit and just write up a solution from scratch? What does that look like? Um, and that's where Portal Network comes from. And they fit really cleanly in with History Expiry, and in theory, in the future, with State Expiry. These are tools that Ethereum needs. Um, with Ethereum clients dropping the history, there's this open question, which is, well, okay, that's good actually. It's really nice for us to let execution clients do less. But if they're going to not do that job anymore, then who's going to do it now? Um, and one of the answers is Portal, and we've got some other answers as well, such as era files and other archival formats. So.
I want to talk a little bit more about those alternatives to surfacing history. I think this is a great segue to the history expiry discussion. Um, when you say Portal Network, is Portal Network the kind of like decentralized peer-to-peer way in which history will always live for Ethereum? And are the other alternatives the ones that are always hosted and serviced by the likes of like Infura and these other like third-party large companies? I think it might take the ecosystem a bit of time to get used to the fact that nodes no longer store the entire record of transactions for the Ethereum blockchain. And so I want to get a good sense, or in this episode, be able to record and kind of share, yeah, what those alternatives are. Like when we say the data is available on these other places, like how reliable are these other places? And is like 90% of it just controlled by these like big companies? And is Portal kind of the only one that is the decentralized peer-to-peer network that you could get this data in a free and like always open manner?
Oh, there's a lot to unpack there. Okay, let's see. So I think one of the things here, maybe if I was going to dig at the part that feels most interesting to me, is this concept of what do our nodes store? And I think that there's a maybe like a false premise in that question, which is that our nodes are all the same. And up until now, that has sort of been the case, right? The concept of what is an execution node has been the same for about forever, right? It serves the JSON RPC. It has a full copy of the state. It has a full copy of the history. It executes blocks at the head of the chain, right? Like this is the definition of an Ethereum node. And I think we're right at the precipice of like a fragmenting of what our nodes do. And I think that's amazing for our infrastructure because it means that our nodes are allowed to specialize. And up until now, the infrastructure hasn't allowed them to specialize, and that's why they're all the same. And that's why they're all approaching the 2 terabyte hard drive limit. And that's why, right, we've had this homogeneous node infrastructure, which is this is an execution node. That's what it does. I think we're about to enter a future where we get a lot of different things that they can do, and it's a choice of do they do all of them? Do they do some of them? Do they do like pick a few? So having all of history will still be a node type. There will still be nodes that people run that maintain a full copy of history. 4.4 doesn't say you must delete it. It says you can delete it. So if I'm running a node as a backend piece of infrastructure for an RPC provider, I'm going to want a node that has the full copy of history on hand and local. If we fast forward to a world where we have state expiry, then we're going to have nodes that want to build blocks, and those nodes will want to have a full copy of the state because it's faster and more economically sound to do block building with a full copy of state. And then we'll have proofs for those blocks getting shipped around the network. And so some of our nodes won't even have to have any of the state locally, and they can ditch some of it. So I think that what history expiry allows us to do is fragment that definition of what an Ethereum node is. So I think we still will have plenty of people who decide that they want to run an archival node of history that holds all of the history. In terms of options, Portal is the one and sole peer-to-peer storage option that I'm aware of that's available for decentralized and peer-to-peer access to the history. I think that's one of like the core tenets that we do care about and that we are also supposed to care about, right? And so proceeding with this without a decentralized peer-to-peer alternative, I don't know, it would feel like a break from our like core ethos. You mentioned things like Infura or just centralized RPC providers will likely be sources of history, and they come with those trade-offs. Turns out they're really fast and efficient to do centralized things, and also there's fragility in that choice. We have this archival format called ERA files that came out of the Status team and the Nimbus client, which is essentially just a bulk storage format for dumping this data into files. There's a number of companies that maintain essentially S3 buckets of these files for history. So it's sort of decentralized in the sense that that there's many of them, that they're all verifiable file formats and things like that. It's not peer-to-peer, right? Each individual one is centralized, but they all sort of operate in the same format. So they're a little bit interchangeable, right? We've got some things across the spectrum from centralized options like Infura to like stuff in the middle, which are people running either S3 buckets or just web servers that host these files to kind of fully peer-to-peer and decentralized solutions on the Portal network side.
I want to dig in a little bit more on the fragmenting execution nodes and the way that they operate. I'm concerned. I didn't realize that this is what this is doing. A big part of it is fragmenting execution nodes, their functionality, and being able to open up the design space for them. Because immediately my head goes to if very quickly history expiry kind of opens up the gate for nodes to specialize and function in different ways. what does that mean for testing? When we think about like testing upgrades, if we know that nodes aren't executing in the same way or behaving in the same way, um, does does this introduce more complexity to the Ethereum protocol? Does is Are we concerned at all that the incentives to operate certain types of nodes might become very convoluted and perhaps insufficient compared to the incentives that are required to operate other types of nodes? And then will Ethereum be left in a place where we have perhaps a ton of like client like nodes and only like 2% of nodes are nodes where that are running the full stack? You're opening up the design. I'm concerned about the design space just opening being opened up too much.
Well, I use the term fragmenting, and I don't know. I guess fragmenting is often a bad word. Maybe I should have come up with a different word here. I think it's a good fragmenting. I think it's I'm looking for a different word and I'm not finding it.
No,
But
it's good. We don't
but
want to
I'm
mark it. You're just taking the word at its true meaning, which I
sure.
we appreciate.
Um, okay. Uh, can anybody point at the future and say what definitely is or is not going to happen? I don't know. I hope that we don't get to a future where any of those bad outcomes that you just mentioned show up. I think we can make a lot of intentional choices along the way, and it isn't going to be something that just suddenly happens to us. So maybe like I don't know, the part of me that wants to be calm and level-headed says like we can all like yell and scream and be afraid of these kind of futures, but also we have all of the control in the world to steer them if that's what we need to do. So that's like the high level hand wavy answer that doesn't really get at any of the specifics of the question you asked. Um, does testing burdens get does this increase the burden of testing? Probably some, right? If execution node operators are kind of maintaining two distinct modes of operation, one in which they have history and one in which they don't, they're going to need to write good software around that. Um, um, this had to happen anyways. Or we just had to live in a world in which nodes held onto history forever, and we breached the 2 terabyte limit, hard drive limit, and then we breached the 4 terabyte hard drive limit, and we can all multiply by 2 over and over again for a while and see what that looks like, right? And I don't think any of us want to be running 16 terabyte hard drives to run our infrastructure. So this had to happen. This is a required change. And there's not really a version where we get to keep both, where we get to make our nodes smaller and keep all of this history, because that is how our clients have been written for forever, is under a fundamental assumption that they have all of the data for all of history available to them. And for us to make our nodes smaller, we have to change that assumption, which means some increase in testing load. Um, do I think it's going to make our nodes fragile in the long term? Probably not. Most of everything that an Ethereum node does is operating on data that is at the head of the chain. This data that is deep in history, it barely has any active use in the protocol anymore. The only thing that nodes are really using this for is to walk their way to the front of the chain, and that's only if they're doing a full historical sync, which most nodes don't do. It is the slower way to get your node to the head of the chain. So this is data that is mostly needed for historical purposes, for archival purposes, for the person who wants to go look up the transaction they sent a couple of years ago, which happens. It's not that it never happens. You mentioned incentives in there. What are the incentives to run these nodes?
Yeah, and the incentives to keep like Portal Network going, things like that. I mean, it just creates so many needs for so many different types of players.
Certainly. Um, so, one way to look at that is that we don't have any incentives today. So, there's really no change here. I don't know. I'm not saying that there's no change, but I do like to point out that there are no incentives today either. So this isn't a huge change. And they run execution clients as they exist today, which are, 1.6, 1.8 terabyte monsters, right? And so if people will run those today, if we're able to give them a node that they can run that takes up a gigabyte of hard drive space instead of 1,900 of those or whatever, if we can give them nodes that are smaller to operate, we should be able to achieve much larger network sizes. We should be able to uh, see nodes running on much lower end hard drives and much lower end just in general machine resources. Um, and we also don't have to operate a network in which all of the operators are the same size. We can still have a network in which that has supernodes in it, that has power operators who choose to operate nodes that store full copies of everything. And one of the fundamental designs of Portal Network is in this sort of single honest operator model, which is basically that it isn't to say that the network will always be healthy in all conditions. It does need a sufficiently sized network to be online and to be healthy. But it's really easy to monitor for that. And the necessary minimums for that level of health are quite achievable. We're not talking about astronomical numbers here. This is absolutely the type of thing that can be run healthily by our community.
This is a little bit off like the history expired tangent, but I am curious because it sounds like you guys have thought this through quite a bit. I'm under the impression that probably like 95% of nodes that are run on Ethereum are run by validators, people that are wanting to earn like staking rewards. And of course, these validators really have no choice in how light of a client they can run versus how heavy of a client they can run. I mean, they can choose certain clients in the like execution layer. There's like five, some are lighter than others, but like you said, there's really no other option. But once history expire goes live, each of the client teams will have different approaches. um, do you foresee that most of these nodes will kind of will like definitely benefit and will definitely kind of choose and go to the client and switch over their client to the client that offers like the most minimal lightweight version of running an Ethereum node? And do you foresee client diversity kind of also exploding with, we have five execution layer clients now, but with the amount of freedom that there is in potentially being able to change what your client services, just like an explosion of the number of clients that we have. Perhaps it doesn't take that much to even maintain a client anymore. And perhaps we see client diversity kind of like reach new heights that was never possible before.
It's definitely one of the hopes that I have. Uh, I spend a lot of time thinking about people behavior because one of the weird things about working in our ecosystem is the distinct and utter lack of authority that we don't have a CTO who steps in and gets all of the teams to work on the same thing at the same time, which means that for things to happen, you have to somehow solve a collective action problem. Everything that gets done in Ethereum is because somebody figured out how to solve a collective action problem. We are, at the end of the day, most of our problems boil down to collective action problems. How do we get everybody to act at the same time, in the same direction, on the same thing? Um, so, uh, game theory and people motivation is kind of your number one. I don't know, if you want to try to figure out how to get everybody to do stuff, you kind of need to look at where their motivations live. Um, for history expiry, my goal has been not to mandate that it was a fun decision to get made because I stood up in the room full of all the devs and I said, "All right, guys, I think we're close. Will you let the other clients drop history?" right? I asked that question sort of over and over again of like, people would have their concerns and be like, okay, if we can address that, will you let the other, this isn't, you don't have to do any work at all. You can leave your client alone. You can not change your client in any way, but will you let the other clients in the room change their client, right? Will we allow this change to happen, where we're going to drop some of history, where we're going to let the clients get smaller? Because I knew that if we could even just allow for one of them to do it, that if one client drops that history, then anybody who's operating a validator set, who's up against that 2 terabyte hard drive limit, can upgrade their hard drive, or they can switch to the client that's smaller. And that affects client diversity. And my hope is that that is motivation for the other clients to also say, maybe I want to do that work too. It seems that our percentage of the network might be shrinking today because people are moving from ours to the other guys. So I think that there's like some game theory there in history expiry and getting everybody to do it. We maybe only need to get one to do it. You talk about like overall network sizes. I think you're correct that a majority of the nodes that are operating today are because they are required to, and they're required to because they're running the validator setup. Um, I hope, I suspect, I also hope that if we can ship Ethereum nodes that are useful to end users, that not for infrastructural use cases, not for validators, not for in protocol use cases, but for developer use cases, right? Today, if you're building on the application layer, I think it's probably a very rare thing for somebody to be running a full Ethereum node for that. They probably point it at a centralized RPC provider and do that. It's a very rational choice to make, right? Like choosing a centralized RPC provider rather than running your own node today is a very rational thing to do. Um, I would love to give people another rational option that wasn't that. And I'm curious, once that option is there, which it almost is, we're very, very close. Once that other rational option is available, right, do we see a larger developer community that chooses to run a portal-based RPC provider locally to develop against? Is it fast enough? Is it good enough? Is it easy enough that it's a rational choice that they can make? Do we see wallet developers bundle a portal client into their wallet instead of pointing it at an RPC provider because it's a viable option? And there just hasn't been a viable option until now. So it makes sense that we see those centralizing forces. So I hope that we can make something that's good enough that people choose to run it because it's useful and because it's easy, because it's small enough that we don't have to look at incentives, because incentives are gross. Incentives introduce perverse incentives. Incentives require you to sort of like optimize for some specific thing, right? And we see that like with MEV. MEV is a result of incentives. It's a very rational result of incentives. And so if we can build something that is free of incentives, we also probably free ourselves of solving weird second order problems like MEV that show up.
I hear you. I can see the bull case of history expiry a lot more clearly, where everybody is running an Ethereum node, but tailored for whatever the heck that they want to do. And it's not dependent on them relying on a centralized RPC provider to do what they want to do.
And I want to point that you said a thing in there that's really important, which is the node that is tailored to doing what you are doing. That has not been possible in all of Ethereum's history. Like, it is the thing that I like spent a lot of time and energy trying to make possible. It's what Portal like wants to make possible, is nodes that are highly tailored to your use case rather than this generic, broad, or large infrastructure use case.
It's crazy that it has taken this long to get this message of what Ethereum nodes could be. Like this of tailoring Ethereum nodes to what you want to do. This seems like such a fundamental kind of shift in the Ethereum network topography and like the Ethereum network. It's so big, but it's so not talked about, Piper. This conversation, history expiry, is always the last agenda item on the call. I want to ask you now about the governance process and the timeline for history expiry and kind of the history of history expiry. I do have a bad habit actually of asking way too many questions all at once. but but when we're talking about this, this seems like such an important change that is coming to Ethereum soon. First of all, when did you go up into that room and ask developers, would you be okay with one client doing, like, what year was that? And why has it taken so long to get history expiry rolling? And now that it is rolling, I mean, why is it not talked about more, you think, on the calls? Like getting ready for this shift.
Because it's well, so to answer that last question, because it's kind of boring.
This is not boring. This
I
seems
know,
very
but
critical.
it's a good hot take. Is that history expiry is boring? The definition of what we're doing is we're just saying clients can do less. We're saying you can just stop holding on to all of this. Like, right, we didn't implement a new feature, not really, not exactly. I mean, clients are having to do some infrastructure work on their clients to implement this. But at the end of the day, a fun and simple way to describe what history expiry is you can stop doing that now. That's it. It's quite simple. Um, it has taken a long time for this to get prioritized. And I think from the outside, that's probably really frustrating. And to be honest, from the inside, it's also really frustrating. But to be fair, and I really do mean to be fair, it makes a lot of sense that it took this long for this to show up. It needed a forcing function, and the 2 terabyte hard drive limit was the forcing function that we needed. It needed alternatives to be mature enough and ready, and it took this long for Portal Network to mature and be ready for this. We wanted there to be a peer-to-peer solution. Execution client teams work for the protocol. In terms of who their number one client is, execution client teams, their primary number one, like, North Star is the protocol itself. And the other use cases are secondary. And I don't mean to insult it, that is the correct prioritization. If you are running one of those teams, that is how you should be prioritizing the work that you are doing. And so it's correct. But that means that everything that's application focused, pointed outwards at, like, the application development side, or just, right, RPC use cases is application facing. It means that you're always going to be second tier to the protocol. I think that what we are doing right now, and a correct way to look at it, is that Portal Network is sort of this new third pillar of Ethereum that is less protocol facing and more application facing. That what we're stepping in and saying is, hey, execution teams, you guys are going to be doing less of this, storing history, maybe with state expiry, storing the state. And we, the portal clients, would really love to take over stewardship of that data and those use cases. We're not saying that you can't do those anymore. By all means, keep doing them as much as you want to keep doing them. But I think portal clients are way better situated to serve those use cases. We are not as beholden to the to protocol developments. We are much more consumers of the protocol development pipeline. And what we care about in like the Portal Network client side of things is building a decentralized peer-to-peer storage layer that is robust at storing and retrieving all of that data, and building clients that serve the APIs that people need in order to get at that data. Like
Hmm.
that's our top, like we don't have a thing that's sitting between us and that as a priority. We don't have the protocol use case constantly pulling us away from that other priority.
How big is the Portal team? And how many clients do you guys have? And is it just the Ethereum Foundation that's funding everything, or do we have many different stakeholders that will be able to keep this public good alive?
It's mostly funded by the EF right now. That's something that needs to change. We need to have a clear definition of what the long term financial viability of Portal network or Portal client teams looks like. There are 5 Portal clients that there six to be joined, or one more to be joining soon. Nethermind has their own Portal client implementation, but it hasn't joined our interoperability test suite yet. So I can't call it one of the uh, I
They can
can't
be a
include
point 0.5.
it could be the 0.5. So we have 5 clients: Rust, JavaScript, Go, Java, and Nim. So there's 5 Portal implementations that make up the Portal network. Let's see, you asked some questions in there. How big is the project? There's probably 20 engineers at this point who make up those different Portal network teams. Um, we've got Portal integrations happening across pretty much almost every client on the execution layer. I think Aragon is the one client who doesn't have a pending integration with a Portal client, for good reason, because I don't think that they actually have a direct need for it. Um, yeah, it's a. I feel like I've lost the thread of what the questions were now, but
Sorry, that's my fault. I did ask too many questions, but you did answer all of them. My question was like, how many people are in the portal? Which or portal team? Which you answered. How many clients do you have? Which you have 5.5. Um, and then third, how is it all funded? And you were saying that it's mostly Ethereum Foundation, but hopefully that will be diversified.
this was a project that I think could only come out of the Ethereum Foundation. It needed to be a multi-client um, effort distributed across different teams. It needed to be something that was truly a multi-client a protocol, not an implementation. Right? We could have gone after this with a small team and built a single implementation of it, and I don't think it would have gone anywhere because you needed an ecosystem to be built out around it. Or at least that's my take.
And that takes time, and that's probably another reason why the way that you guys went about it in incorporating so many different client teams, it's taken a long time. One last question I want to ask is around the timeline of all of this. In the most recent ACD call that happened this week, developers were sharing that because of one of the EIPs, EIP 6110 in Pectra, which impacts validator deposit transactions, it is going to be complicated to achieve the May 1st deadline, especially because Pectra doesn't seem like it's going to happen by then anymore on mainnet. There was quite a few suggestions to delay the history expiry deadline to sometime after Pectra goes live on mainnet. There were also lots of kind of, again, concerns shared about the lack of testing that there's been from clients on Sepolia testnet. I think there's been questions about whether the portal network has gone through audits. There was also questions about we haven't gotten consensus on the Ethereum wire protocol versioning for this. I mean, at the end of the road, it just seems as though there's a lot pushing you guys back. How confident are you that we are going to get history expiry this year?
Reasonably confident. This all seems like par for the course for Ethereum core development, which is a slight jab, but actually, it's how we figure things out, right? Like to try to hold that May 1st deadline when it doesn't make sense is not what we do. We there is a there is an ethos within the core development, which is that like it would be irresponsible of us to ship something simply because we said we were going to ship it on that date if it wasn't ready. The dependency and the EIP 6110 issue is a real and valid concern, and I think delaying when we originally set the May 1st deadline, right? That was set because it was assumed that Petra would be there by then. It makes absolute sense to delay the go live deadline for mainnet until after Petra is live because of the 6110 issue. Testing issues, absolutely. A go live on Sepolia on May 1st is a great plan. I'm glad that the execution teams and ACD teams chose to do a trial run. Right, it is important that we run things on testnets before we run them on mainnet. Um, like I've said, the change here is simple, and that isn't meant to undermine the idea that things can go wrong, because absolutely things unexpected things go wrong all the time, right? Like that is the world of software is riddled with that. Um, but this is kind of no different than all kinds of other changes that we've made. There will be tests for it. There will be uh, test nets for it. There will be each client team will have their own testing to make sure that their client can behave. And at the end of the day, for this to go well, our clients need to still be able to sync, and most of the clients don't rely on the deep history for syncing. They do snap sync to get to the head of the chain, um, and in terms of chain history, it isn't necessary for operating at the head of the chain. Um, there's nothing drastically new here. It's just one more change that clients need to make. Is kind of how I see this.
Yeah. And one more final push to
Absolutely.
get people over the hump. I think the May 1st deadline, though, in keeping it with Sepolia testnet, will definitely be a good date to keep. I think developers are
Well,
still talking about it, but
absolutely. And as soon as Pectra has a go live date, it's going to be the first thing that I ask the room. All right, we know when Pectra's live. What's the new drop date, right? Like, uh, uh, it isn't important that we hit the date. It's important that we pick one.
that's a lot more rational and a lot more a nuanced way of going about doing protocol development. I agree. Instead of just arbitrarily keeping to a date that you set without all the information then. Although developers definitely have a tendency to get ahead of themselves um, and set things that are very dependent on others. One very last question, more personal question for you, Piper. Some developers have gotten very, very burnt out pushing through a code change that they'd like to see on Ethereum mainnet through the governance process, through years and years of ups and downs. Of course, I think about some of the incredible champions of initiatives like EOF, incredible champions of people who are doing BLS precompile and finally seeing it live, go live hopefully with Pectra. History expiry is no different. Is there anything that would make you like leave Ethereum protocol development? Like just say, you know what, this is my limit. Like I'm done. Like if history expiry didn't go live this year, would this like make you leave Ethereum? Or are there anything like, yeah, what would make you stop being in this ecosystem if there is anything?
Interesting. Um, I would probably. There was a point along the way with portal network development where it was unclear if we were going to make it across the necessary finish line fast enough before people lost faith in the idea that we were going to deliver on something that was valuable. Um, it would have been hard to survive the death of that, mostly just because I spent most of my social capital and credibility on the idea, and I probably would have felt pretty bankrupt at the end of that. Um, Unsure what to start on next, unsure where to go next. There's like a soul to Ethereum, um, that I still believe in. That is like why I started. That we're like setting out to do something good in the world. I think if I fully lost that, that if it really no longer felt like there was a pocket of our ecosystem that I could work in a credibly neutral manner, that I could work on things that were public goods, I would be no longer very interested in working in this ecosystem, because why'd work here and that, or just go get double the paycheck in traditional finance, right? Like, it's hard for me to see what the difference is there. It's a pretty like narrow view of what the work options are out there, but yeah, I think if it felt like there was no place for me to work in this ecosystem where I could work on public goods, then I would probably lose my interest.
May Ethereum never lose its soul.
I certainly hope not.
Thank you, Piper, for the great conversation on history expiry and your work in Ethereum. It has been a real honor to speak with you, especially knowing how long you've been in the space and working in this ecosystem.
Thanks, Christine. It's been an honor. It's really nice to be here today.
And thank you to all of our listeners who were listening to another episode of The Infinite Jungle. We hope that you learned something new about Ethereum. I am signing off from the concrete jungle that is New York City. In your explorations of the infinite jungle that is Ethereum, stay safe out there.